You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making tomorrow's headlines with Guardian columnist Zoe Williams and The Sun on Sunday's political editor, Kate Ferguson. They'll be with us now and again at 11:30. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, tomorrow's Eye raises concerns about debt that households may run to pay for energy bills, reporting that 1.7 million households have already or are considering cancelling energy direct debits. While the Express reports National Grid bosses plan to offer rebates to households for turning off their washing machines during early evening peak hours. The Telegraph's top story is on NHS 111 callers waiting 20 times longer than they should be, with some patients reporting being left on hold for up to an hour. While the Mail is also leading on a health story, a new drug being trialled by the NHS that could prevent a tenth of cancer deaths. The Guardian reports that basic needs to care home residents aren't being met because of a lack of staff. While the Times says Boris Johnson is still more popular with Tory voters than either candidate to replace him as Prime Minister. That's Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss. The FT leads on Russian diplomat Gennady Gatilov dismissing chances of a peace deal with Ukraine. While the Metro reports boxing star Tyson Fury's calls for a crackdown on knife crime following his cousin's death by stabbing. That's also the top story in The Sun. And something slightly different from the Daily Star, reporting an influx of wasps from Germany to the UK. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Zoe Williams, columnist at The Guardian, and Kate Ferguson, The Sun on Sunday's political editor. Welcome to you both. Let us start with the Telegraph and their front page story on NHS 111, the fact that callers are being left on hold for 20 times longer than is the expected time. Zoe.
It's an unsurprising story if you think about the wider crisis in the NHS, right? So you've got A&E bosses saying don't go to A&E unless you absolutely have to, which is an extremely difficult call to make as a private individual. It's really not that easy to triage yourself. Then you've got the crisis in ambulances. If you do go into A&E, you've got the crisis in paramedics arriving at the scene if you need an ambulance. And now this kind of gatekeeper service, the one that's meant to protect the more acute care from people who could be cared for over the phone, also in crisis. So it's really a signal of this not being any kind of isolated problem, but rather, absolute chaos across the piece, which is fundamentally the result of having been hollowed out and underfunded for a large number of years.
Yes, I mean, it does seem in recent days, and actually longer than that, we have been seeing story after story talking of resources being pushed within the NHS, and this is the latest in a long list, Kate.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think whoever the next Prime Minister is, there's two big crises awaiting them. One is obviously the energy crisis, and cost of living crisis, which I'm sure we'll speak about later. But the first is this NHS crisis. So as Zoe was saying, we're seeing the NHS under strain across all areas. So currently, paramedics the hospitals are so short of beds that you've got paramedics in ambulances queuing up, trying to admit their patient. They can't, which is why you're seeing these really long ambulance waiting times, and now this 111 triage service also under massive pressure. So as the story says today, you're meant to get a call back you're meant to get your call answered, within 20 seconds. And the average now is 6.5 minutes, people waiting hours sometimes to have the call answered. I think this is before winter even hit, right? So this is the middle of the summer. It's meant to be a relatively calm period for the NHS as they start gearing up, preparing for the winter crisis. But that they're already under such massive strain gives us, I think, a bit of a flavour of just how bad things are going to get this winter. And a huge question for the next Prime Minister of what you're going to do about it. Some people will say we need to go on a hiring spree of doctors, nurses, medics internationally. we did a interview with Liz Truss at the Sun on Sunday over the weekend, and she was talking about maybe signing up a sort of dad's army of retired medics to come back to the front line of the NHS, like we saw in COVID. We will certainly see some kind of movement around that, I think, but whether or not that you have those people in the books to actually plug the shortfall in staffing is yet to be seen.
Sorry, let's move on to the eye and more on the cost of living debt crisis and people's worries over energy bills. Liz Truss promising more help for households, but no specifics.
Well, to be honest, Liz Truss's promise is actually in Kate's interview, so she could probably speak better to just how precise Truss was prepared to be. My hunch is that she's doing the exact opposite of what any strategist would tell her to do, which is that, at the moment, the only plan on the table is Labour saying just freeze them at the current rates nobody can afford anymore. She has three options. She either ignores that altogether and lets 40 million British people slide into fuel poverty, which is astronomical, or she just rolls over and says, yes, let's do Starmer's plan and pretend it's my plan, which is not unheard of in the Conservative Party, but it's not a great start. Or she does this slightly weak, meeting him almost halfway. Nobody's really sure how far she's prepared to meet him. And frankly, it has set a bit of a challenge for them, because anything less than a completely frozen bill at the current levels is going to really be problematic, because people are going to say, well, freezing it at £1,000 more a year doesn't actually help me. I don't have any more. So it's really, really difficult situation to be in. But I think coming out with these very kind of piecemeal, weak, inconclusive, vague plans is probably the worst of all possible options. But as I say, it's Kate's interview, so maybe she says something, maybe you can give more kind of context.
Kate, do you have any further insight as to the means and the ways that she might be proposing to help families more?
Well, obviously, Britain's facing this huge cost of living crisis. I think we had one estimate yesterday that the energy price cap could hit £6,000 next year. It's currently 2,000, going to go up to, I think, 3,200. Gives you a sense of just how big a crisis, how much those bills are ratcheting up by. Now, Liz Truss throughout the campaign has said, look, I'm going to cut taxes. And that's twofold. She's saying that cutting taxes will finally kickstart our economy and get us growing again, and also will help a bit with your energy bills. It seems that realistically, she knows she's got to do more. And when I spoke to her in the Sun on Sunday this weekend, she said she was looking across the board at what help she can give, and hinted heavily that families will get more help, and also businesses who are struggling with those spiralling energy costs. But she does not, and I think probably will not, tell us any more details before she's safely got those keys to number 10 in her pocket. Interestingly, at the same time as this, the Treasury is working up proposals. And the big question for the Treasury is, how much money does the next Prime Minister want to spend? And so how targeted should the support be, or how broad brush? Both Rishi and Liz have talked about wanting to give more targeted support. The big question is that going to be enough when bills are just going up so much? And really, I think the Treasury are looking at all options on the table, short of nationalising the energy companies. So from beefing up benefits a bit to doing something maybe a bit more universal, like topping up the Rishi Sunak plan. And we had a story yesterday about one particularly kind of, I guess, radical proposal, which would see GPs prescribe money off your energy bills, basically. The thing the Treasury are grappling with is, how big do you go? How much money do you want to spend? And therefore, how universal should it be? And that's a question for the next Prime Minister, really, because it comes with a massive price tag.
Yeah. Meanwhile, just so we'll move on, but we'll fit this in before the break. Meanwhile, in the Times, we read that the cost to UK households of bailing out nationalised energy retailer Bulb is expected to soar to more than $4 billion by the spring, unless the government achieves a sale, Zoe.
I mean, this is a classic FT story, actually, because it's quite technically complex. The reason it's spiralling so much is that once the company is nationalised, there are laws against hedging, against price increases, but everybody knows the price increases are going to happen. So they can't actually build those price increases into the valuation of the company or the profitability of the company, even though the prices are obvious, because that's against the law. So instead they're kind of, holding this bulb retailer up, not knowing whether anybody's going to buy it. Now, I mean, it's a really interesting situation, because everybody talks as though the only thing a government can do is at the retailer level, right? So they can either fund price caps at a certain level, they can fund price caps but let Ofgem set the level, they can freeze the price cap and spend 60 billion keeping it frozen, or they can nationalise and have this terrible bailout bill, which, similar to what happened with RBS. And anything other than that is much too radical to contemplate. So looking at the actual wholesaler, looking at the production of gas, looking at the production of energy, and having any government intervention in that is just too rich for the kind of discourse's blood, if you like. But actually, the reason that in France energy bills are going up by 4% and here they're going up by what they're going up by is because they had the difficult conversations about the source of the energy, not just the retailer of the energy.
OK, Zoe and Kate, for the moment, thank you. We're going to take a break. Coming up, the Daily Mail lead with a new blood test trialled by the NHS that could reportedly stop 1 in 10 cancer deaths. Stay with us to hear more on that. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, Zoe Williams, columnist at The Guardian, and the Sun on Sunday's political editor, Kate Ferguson. Let us take a look at the Mail and this astonishing story. Potentially very, very good news. New blood tests that could stop 1 in 10 cancer deaths being trialled. Take us into this story, Kate.
Yeah, this has been described in the piece as the holy grail, potentially, of spotting cancer early. So it's this big trial that's being launched in the NHS, which can, apparently this trial can spot cancers before symptoms show. So we all know that it's so important to catch cancer early, and by the time people present, particularly at the moment where, we've just talked earlier about the crisis in our NHS, that big COVID backlog we're still getting through, lots of people not presenting early enough. So this test seems to be able to detect 1 in 10 cancers. And there's some stats in the piece about how if it was rolled out nationwide, it could save hundreds of thousands of lives. Now, we should point out it's quite early in the trials, but it seems that it's incredibly kind of optimistic news and a real kind of breakthrough in science. Yes,
possibly, if all goes successfully with the trials, it could be rolled out as early as 2024. But they're suggesting that it could save around 16,000 lives a year, Zoe.
Well, I'm sorry to sound a note of caution, and obviously I want a cure for cancer as much as the next man, but I've been in this game such a long time, and I've seen the Daily Mail run cure for cancer stories about so many things. Tomatoes cure cancer, being thinner cures cancer. They just seem it. I feel like it's their out of office auto reply of a front page, and this blood test is still at trial stage. And I don't even think the medics behind it or the pharmaceutical companies behind it would make the claims that the Daily Mail is making. So I don't want to be a Cassandra. I'm just saying it hasn't always worked out the way the Mail thinks it will with cancer.
Although it does say hundreds are taking part in the trial. Of 140,000 volunteers are already being referred for a scan or colonoscopy, get my words out, as a result of the test findings. And it's expected around half of those referred could have cancer. So it does seem to be in motion, Zoe, and showing very positive signs.
It's gigantic. It's a gigantic scale study and a very welcome one. I'm just not sure that I'm going to take 1 in 10 cancer deaths ended.
OK, noted. We shall see. We shall see. Final story. This is a sad story, and Tyson Fury calling for intervention in knife crime. This is following the death of his cousin, who was stabbed to death in the street in Altrincham. Kate.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a horrible and grim story. A 31-year-old man, Tyson Fury's cousin, stabbed to death in outside a pub in Greater Manchester. I think it raises a broader point, though, doesn't it? Tyson Fury today saying enough is enough. We need to get tougher on knife crimes. He's calling for much tougher sentencing. And I think this raises a more broader issue, which is we are seeing violent crime spike massively across not just cities, but the whole country. And this is a sort of big issue rumbling along in the background. We haven't actually seen the leadership candidates talk too much about crime. It's not been at the top of the agenda given the cost of living crisis, the NHS crisis. But among voters, when you look at polls or when you sit in on focus groups, which I've done a lot of, as you can imagine, in the last few weeks, you can see this is incredibly high up their agenda.
Yes, very important to people indeed. We must leave it there. Sorry, Kate. And Zoe, we shall